Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Thrive in China Roundtable, where we're going to talk about how to export to China. In the agenda for today, we're going to be providing 6 tips on how to succeed, meaning how to create a proper foundation for what you're looking to do in China. And then we're going to go through the available sales channels to actually sell into China. Before we start today's session, though, I just want to explain how the roundtable works. So how the roundtable works is that we are going to educate you. We're here to teach you a little bit on how to succeed in China, how to do business in China. This is your time spent. Use it wisely. There's the chat box in the tools section. Use that for any questions you might have, for any comments that you might have. For those of you that are watching this on replay, if you do have questions, jot those down and then send me an email or join our Thrive in China WeChat group where you can then ask those questions as well. That's why we've just recently opened up our WeChat group that we can then pass these questions on so we can pass them from the roundtable actually into the WeChat group. From a technical standpoint, we are using Zoom meetings. If you run into any technical difficulties, my only suggestion is log off, log back in. If I run into any issues, it does take about a minute, 2 minutes for me to reboot the system, but I will be then logging back in to finish off today's presentation. We are recording today's session and the recordings will be available to everybody. We will not be distributing the presentations though. All right, so who am I? For those of you that are new to our roundtable, my name is Kristina Koehler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have over 17 years of corporate services and corporate compliance experience in China, specifically in Shanghai, where I have been based since 2020 due to COVID. I'm based out of Luxembourg. What we do is we help clients with a variety of different services thinking about administration. So everything from pre-investment advisory to trademark registrations to incorporations to all of the outsourcing solutions in terms of accounting, tax, payroll functions. We also provide certain unique services. One of such services is where I act as a cross-border e-commerce mentor, where it's a 6-month if you will, mentorship program where I introduce you to my entire network of TPs, media agencies, logistics providers. We also provide non-executive director services, again, where we join board discussions and we talk about brainstorming and whatnot and in relation to China strategy. What we do is we also create a hell of a lot of educational content on China. So if you're interested in learning more, about how to do business in China, about how to succeed in China. There's a lot of content about how to be compliant in China. Then go to our YouTube channel where you will find all the videos that are located there. And if you haven't received our ebook yet, we have an ebook. It's a free ebook on the 10 biggest mistakes companies make in China. I wrote this in 2020, predominantly highlighting the mistakes I made as I entered into the Chinese market. But also I added in certain case studies on clients that had made mistakes along their journey as well. You can email me at kristina@woodburnglobal.com if you'd like to have your free copy. And just to also extend from that, we've just written 2 new ebooks, which I haven't highlighted here. One is on how to export to the top 5 tips on how to export to China. And the second ebook is all about cross-border e-commerce in China. So if you are interested in getting copies of those, just put in that in the email as well. So today's topic is about how to export to China, sales channels and tips to succeed. I spelled succeed wrong. Apologies for that. Why am I bringing this topic up? Well, predominantly because right now there's not very much that we can do in China. With the Shanghai lockdowns, and our office is based out of Shanghai, it has been quite disappointing, quite depressing to see what has actually been occurring in the last 2.5 months. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Things do seem to be opening up. And so really for the last 2.5 months, I've been preaching about preparation. it is of vital importance to prepare yourself for the Chinese market. And if you cannot physically get yourself there right now, but also your third-party providers on the ground cannot actually help and facilitate your business, then let's prepare and see what we can do so that when Shanghai is officially open up and all of the other surrounding cities and Beijing and etc. are opening up, then you can hit that green light and execute. People have the tendency to prepare and execute at the same time. That obviously leads to a lot of mistakes. I'm a big believer in preparation first, understand what you can and cannot do, and then create a strategy that is specific to you and your company, and then execute that. So today we're going to be talking about how to export to China. I am going to be starting off today's presentation actually with the tips to succeed in China, which are actually foundational tips. All right. The bare minimum that you guys have to do to make sure you are prepared for China. And these are tips that are not something you do just one off. It is something that you do continuously over time, and that you check on over time. Okay. So tip number one is save your brand. I just had a conversation with a brand who has been approached by a distributor who actually wants to have exclusivity. And it was the distributor who did their own research to say, well, we cannot work with you until you've registered your brand in China. So even distributors now, people that you will meet in your sales channels, are all going to say to you, if you haven't done this step, we cannot work for you. There's nothing that we can do. So your number one priority should be saving your brand. Evaluating what are your brand assets, whether it's trademarks, whether it's patents, whether it's copyright, and understand in your head that if China is part of your global expansion strategy, you need to protect your brand assets. You can write off China as a market of entry if somebody else has registered your brand assets. All right. So I always raise the question, how much is your brand worth to you? There's always a financial value that is associated with brand assets. A good portion of your revenue will come from your brand assets. So evaluate how important your brand is to you. Potentially, you might even say, Kristina, I'm not using my brand that I use in the UK or wherever. I'm going to create a Chinese brand. That's all fine as long as you're clear on your strategy. But if your idea is to actually utilize your brand that you've set up 100 years ago in the US, in Canada, in the UK, wherever, then this is the number one priority. And I get that it's an administrative measure, but I cannot tell you how many brands are roadblocked out of China because they just haven't taken this administrative step. So do think wisely about this. Now, what is the administrative step? Well, first of all, it's searching to understand whether your trademark is available. Probably first is understanding what brand assets you want to register. Here, I'm talking specifically about trademarks because I'm not a patent expert nor a copyright expert. There, you should really go to IP lawyers that have that level of expertise in your industry and sector. I'm going to talk simply about trademarks here. You should know what trademarks you want to register, which ones you're going to be using in China for marketing initiatives that will be listed on products, on service agreements. Evaluate what you're actually going to be using, what brand is going to be displayed on your website in China, and make a list of that. All right. And then you've got to search whether they're available. Don't start registering things if you've not actually done the search. I've also seen companies waiting 9 to 12 months to then discover that their trademark is not available. I'm a perfect example of this, although we did do a search, but it just so happened 2 weeks prior to filing our own trademark, a IP squatter registered it. And to make a long story short, we ended up rebranding because we didn't want to buy it off of them. The price was too high, was unreasonable. So again, I'm just saying, I've gone through this myself. I've gone through this pain point of somebody taking my brand, preventing me from actually utilizing it in China. I don't want other people to go through this. So evaluate what you want to register. do a search. Now you have to go through the CTMO office to do the search. We offer that search free of charge for our client, for companies, because I think it's unethical to actually charge somebody to do a search if actually in 80% of the cases it's not available. You need to then decide which entity will own that trademark. Do you have an IP holding company? Are you going to have your head office hold it? And then you've got to understand what classes and subclasses you're going to register under. There are 45 classes. There are thousands of subclasses under each of those classes. So really think very carefully what you're going to do. If you want to make your life easier, evaluate how you've done your registrations in your home jurisdiction, evaluate how you've done it in other markets, and then we can work from there in terms of how you want to register in those classes and subclasses. This is an administrative point, guys. It's really not complicated. You fill out a registration order form and we do it straight away. It's nothing that is complicated. So do think about putting this as a #1 priority. Otherwise, when I dictate who the sales channels are, those people are going to do their homework and see that you haven't registered it, and they're not going to want to work with you. All right. The next tip I'm going to give is data. Do you have any? Now, data is something I find is fundamental. And again, it should not be something that you do just once. There is a variety of data that you will need to analyze to understand what is the market potential, to understand what sales channels you should be utilizing, to understand within those sales channels, what sub-sales channels you should be utilizing. And it's not something you do once, it's something you do continuously in the lifespan of your China journey. Now, the feedback that I get is, Kristina, we don't have the resources, financial resources to spend on obtaining data and doing the data analysis. If you don't have those financial resources, then I'm afraid you are going to make plenty of mistakes when you go into China. And probably you'll be spending a lot more money on fixing those mistakes than if you had just obtained the data up front. There's a variety of data you can obtain. This is more geared towards brands, but this is very similar whether you're B2C or B2B, okay? You should look at the market segmentation. You should do product testing, advertising testing, satisfaction and loyalty analysis, brand awareness and reach, price research, competitor benchmarking. Now, this is just 7 items. There's a whole bunch of other data you can obtain. Data mining is critical. What else you can do is you can also, just as an idea, is if you are into cross-border e-commerce, you go on the various e-commerce platforms and you obtain consumer trend data. Right? There's so much that you can do and so much that is available to obtain without spending an arm and a leg. So when people approach me and say, I don't have the financial resources, actually, I'm pretty brash and I say, well, how much do you think a research study is? How much do you think it's really going to cost you? And in their mind, it's going to be like 50,000 pounds, 50,000 US dollars. It's not. You're talking about a couple thousand pounds or US dollars to obtain data. But you can't do anything. I do not know how you can create a strategy and understand the right sales channels for you if you don't have the data at your fingertips. You need to evaluate whether the opportunities exist in China and to what extent do they exist. And again, I don't know how you can do that if you don't have the data at your fingertips. Okay. And whether you are product or service oriented does not matter. You can always do research. All right. And if you then come to me and say, well, Kristina, normally we do our data analysis and our data mining by physically going into China and we have in-house teams. Well, we can't do that right now. All right. There are quarantine regulations, there are lockdowns, so you're not going to send anybody over. That does not mean that you cannot then outsource that work to providers that are in China. All right. So again, if you think about sending somebody over, flight costs, hotel costs, transportation costs for that individual versus outsourcing the whole function for a fixed fee, you might find that it's very similar pricing in any case. Don't let these things become obstacles for you in terms of market entry. but getting data is critical, and there are still providers on the ground who can do that. And again, not all of China is in a lockdown. All right, Shanghai is in the most severe, Beijing is partial, and there are about 39, 40 cities that are in this semi-partial lockdown. All right, and again, Shanghai is currently in a partial status, it's opening up. So things can start happening. Do this prep work. Tip number 3 is build your ecosystem. All right, COVID has taught me that I cannot do anything in China without having a team of people, not necessarily employees, but a team of people that are on the ground who can support and scale up my business. So build up your ecosystem. Who do you need in your network that can help you to build and grow your business? And most importantly, support it. Okay? Remember, knowledge is power. These people are going to educate you, but they're also going to support you. All right? It's not just third parties. It's a variety of different people that are going to be in your ecosystem. All right? You need to identify who you need. I'm going to throw out providers out there. Do you need a lawyer? Do you need an accounting firm? Do you need a headhunter? Do you need a media agency? Do you need a TP? Do you need a logistics provider? Do you need a PR agency? I mean, the list can go on, guys. This is just very brief. Distributors. Do you need a network of distributors? Do you need a network of licensees? Sales agents? Do you need to hire your own staff and team? All right, that's just a brief understanding. Do you need the support of chambers of commerce or trade commissioners? All right, I mean, that's just a very brief outline of who should be in your ecosystem. And it's a matter of networking that, right? And it's also a matter of not just having one person in each category, but having several of those in your category that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can verify and validate information from, right? Again, knowledge is power, and knowledge is what is actually going to give you leverage as you grow in the Chinese market and as you negotiate with a variety of different providers. Remember, the goal is that you build an empowering business ecosystem, okay? You cannot do everything on your own. And I also would not rely on just one person to do everything for you. You really should have a group of people that you can bounce ideas off of, verify and validate information from, all right? Now, there's several ways to meet or connect. There are lawyers, there's corporate service providers, chambers of commerce, China country associations. You've got the virtual trade shows. You've got LinkedIn, which a lot of people think that is still blocked, and that it is blocked in China. It's still not yet blocked in China, although there are rumors that it might be, or that LinkedIn might exit the market. There's also mini programs on WeChat. There's virtual networking events. Remember, now that there are these lockdowns, a lot of the chambers of commerce and associations are offering Zoom calls, again, with third parties, with providers that could very well be key to your ecosystem. So don't underestimate these things. And joining these seminars, webinars, whatever you want to call them, roundtable discussions, it's a way of expanding on your knowledge base, and it's a way of networking to those speakers that are presenting whatever topic they're presenting on. All right. Tip number 4 is obviously vetting your partners. All right. People should be vetting me. Everybody should be vetted, right? That they are truly the experts that they say they are in the field that they are in. Okay. That their knowledge level is higher than yours. All right. But also that they are taking your company in their best interest. I created a presentation a while ago on the value ladder. There are a lot of companies out there who want to work with providers who just do it for them, right? They're like, here, I delegate to you. You take full responsibility. I don't think that's a great strategy in terms of working with partners. I think you need to work with a partner who wants to build up the business with you. You are the center point as a leader, as an entrepreneur. as a China manager. You need to work with the providers. The providers want to work with you to build up the business. To just delegate it to them is not going to give you the return on investment that you wish for. Because in many instances, that distributor is going to work on his best interests, not on the company's best interests or the brand's best interests. All right. So definitely vet your partners, not only in terms of their background, but also in terms of how they plan on working with you. How do they plan on servicing? Okay. What type of data are they going to be giving you to support your business so that decisions can be made quickly so that you can pivot in certain directions, like i.e. when there's a pandemic and a major lockdown. All right. So you can find your partners by searching online. You can also use Tmall B2D, which has got about 100,000 distributors listed. You can use B2B matchmaking companies. A lot of the chambers of commerce and associations have this service available. But you might also find, like this client did, that if you build a certain level of reputation globally or even in China, distributors may actually reach out to you. And you need to be prepared when they contact you. The market has changed dramatically over time in that, 20 years ago, 17 years ago, as I was entering China, distributors were just saying, yes, we want you as a client. Yes, 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 please come to us. Please use our services. They were desperate for the business. Nowadays, distributors aren't desperate anymore. They are actually combing through and researching companies that they think will fit into their portfolio and where they will make money off of. So think about how you're going to build your reputation, right? Think about, again, the brand awareness and the reach. And you might find that people contact you, are interested in representing you and your brand and your company in China. And you just have to make sure that you vet them properly, right? Are they who they say they are? And there's a lot of ways that you can do vetting. Obviously, you can hire due diligence companies who do background checks on these companies, or if you don't want to spend the money, then you can do desktop research yourself. Do a general online search using both, I say English, maybe Western, but then also Chinese search engines. If they have a fixed phone line, call it. Obviously now, if they're based in Shanghai, nobody's in the offices, so that might not actually work. But do they have an answering machine? Do they answer in the name of the company? It's always to check, do they actually exist? Check if your contacts are actually working for them as employees or are just simply authorized reps. And then ask for references. Talk to third parties, customers, suppliers, competitors, government, associations, media, whomever. Try and find research that whether people have been speaking about them. All right. You may want to check the address. Again, not something that can be done right now, especially if they're based in Shanghai and the Shanghai region. But what you can do is download their information from the Ministry of Commerce website. The business license details can be taken, where you can also do your background check in terms of who owns the company, what is the registered office address, who is in the corporate management structure, what is their capital investment, what's in their business scope, etc. What is needed to do that is the Chinese name of the company, and if you have the Chinese address, it's even better. You can always ask for their business license copy. Why not? The worst thing that they're going to say is no. So why not ask, right? Check the bank account. What's always interesting, especially, 17 odd years ago, was that you would have a company name on your invoice, but then the bank account went to a person or individual. I always find that sketchy, right? It doesn't give me great emphasis. And being that I am in this profession that I'm in, I am looking at all the details. Many people don't pay attention to those things. So again, I'm highlighting here, make sure you're checking that the company name, bank account information is associated with the company name. Again, it doesn't ever hurts to ask for their financial data. They might not give it, but who says you can't ask, right? You might be surprised and get that information. Whether then it's true information is another thing, but why not ask? You can always ask for the audit report that's printed out from the auditor. And again, ask for references. And don't just ask for them, execute on that and contact those references. right? Understand what their experiences have been, bad or good. You need to know what the pros and cons are when you are working with partners. Tip number 5 is designing your China business model. And now we're gearing towards what sales channels exist, all right? But I want to give you an overview of this, all right? You need to determine what legal structure fits your business activity, but most importantly, fits your commitment level, okay? And I would almost go as far as to say what also fits your financial resources. Now, you can have a company in your home jurisdiction, i.e. your head office, and you just do it alone and you do all transactions through this company. Not a problem, but obviously that's the least amount of risk, but that's also the least amount of commitment. You can then go through distributors locally in China that handle your trade e-commerce needs. You can work with media agencies who handle your brand development as you're preparing for the trade transactions and supply chain transactions. You can hire an individual from your home jurisdiction to relocate to China and act as your BD manager, sales manager. It's not something I would recommend doing right now as the borders are being shut and quarantine regulations and whatnot. You can also hire an individual through an employer of record service who's also placed on the ground. And this individual can be your sales manager, BD manager, brand manager, if you will. That is more feasible to do currently. And then you can go off and set up an entity. All right. So these are the types of structures that you can actually set up to facilitate your sales into China. Now, there's no one that is right or wrong. It's just that you have to look at your commitment level to the market, your risk level to the market, your financial resources to make an investment into China, and evaluate what works best for you. You also have to evaluate, who do I know in my ecosystem to help facilitate these sales channels, to develop these sales channels, right? But you have a lot of options available at your fingertips. Now, my philosophy is create a phased approach. Why do I say that? I say that because I think every single company should have certain KPIs, goals, objectives, if you will, which dictate how you move from one phase to the next. So if currently you are a company based out of the UK and you're doing trade transactions that are direct with China, that's phase 1. And there's no issues with that. But what is going to move you to phase 2? What is going to move you to say, actually, I now need to have a media agency to support my brand development? Or what's going to move you, what's going to trigger you to say, actually, now I think it's wise to actually hire somebody on the ground that is responsible for the China market, but is physically on the ground to meet new clients, to maybe even assist the distributor in sales discussions because they don't necessarily have the clear technical know-how. What are these triggers going to be? What's the trigger that may push you to say, now it's time to set up our own company? So when you're creating this phased approach, think about strategy-wise, what are those triggers? And if you hit those triggers, that means you call for a board meeting, you sit down and you say, hey guys, we've hit the value trigger, we've hit a revenue of XYZ amount. We now have to think about the next step to really scale up. All right. What you don't want to happen in your business is that you plateau. What you want in your China business is that you are consistently scaling up. And to do that, you're going to have to jump from phase to phase to phase to do that growth and to maintain that growth. Okay, don't fall into a comfort situation where actually you know it's not ideal and you get too comfortable. All right, make sure you dictate what those KPIs, goals, and objectives are. Create your China export strategy. All right, so I'm just going to outline here a couple of tips for overseas retailers. One is design your supply chain structure and think very carefully about how you're going to execute that. What is the operational side of that? And make sure you're thinking about compliance, you're thinking about tax efficiency, everything, okay? But think very carefully about your supply chain methodology. What I tend to do with my clients, I take a paper and I start drawing out the supply chain. Where are the goods manufactured? Is there a trader? They get exported to China. How are they going to do this? And you move on, you move on, you move on. Okay, but draw it out. Design that supply chain. And again, think very carefully about the operational side. The next is do your due diligence, because in your early phases, you are going to be delegating certain functions to business partners that are located in China. Make sure you're working with the right business partners. All right. Make sure you know what their job responsibilities are. Make sure they say who they are, that they really are who they say they are. Do your due diligence. Do that homework piece, that you are fully clear on who you are partnering with and why. The third one is contract terms. A contract is not an email. I hate to say that. There are still a lot of companies who negotiate terms and conditions in email. And then when they want to exit relationships with distributors, they can't because they don't have any formal contract available. So make sure you've got contract terms in place. You need to protect yourself as the overseas retailer, overseas seller. Make sure you've thought of all the exit clauses. If you've signed an exclusive agreement, make sure you know why exactly you're signing that exclusive agreement. If you do that, I would highly recommend that you set KPIs and targets for your distributors, licensees, or whomever. And if they don't reach that, you can exit, but definitely have those contract terms in place. And then create internal compliance programs. Now, what do I mean by this? One is you want to make sure that your parties in China are not doing anything illegal. But apart from that, you also want to make sure they're doing their job. If you have a responsibility list, which is 10 functions, right? One is customs clearance. Another function is warehousing. Another function is brand building. Another function is executing marketing campaigns. Another function is setting up an e-commerce store. I'm making stuff up right now, okay? But you can get my point. You've got to make sure that all of the functions, all of these 10 functions, they are doing 100% well. If at any point you see that actually they're really not marketing folks, then stop that function. Renegotiate the terms and conditions and the responsibilities, and allocate that function to somebody else who is an expert in that, and that is their daily job, is brand building. Okay, so the internal compliance program, yes, it is making sure that you minimize your compliance risks working with the third parties in China, but it's also making sure that these guys are reaching their KPIs, goals, and objectives, and that they are actually properly doing all of the functions and responsibilities that you've allocated to them. All right, and react quickly if they're not. Make sure you're changing things up. Otherwise, again, you're simply going to plateau. You're not going to scale up as you should be scaling up. Now, I wanted to list today some trigger points for people to think about when they're moving from one phase to the next phase to the next phase, okay? And these are just questions you should be asking yourself, and whether these would be good trigger points for you to put into your strategy. Looking at the volume of business, i.e. how much is being ordered. Looking at the value of the business. What is the revenue value? I wouldn't just stop there though. I would also look at your net profitability for China, right? A lot of people who do direct sales, meaning they do direct sales from their head office to China, they don't necessarily keep a separate P&L just for China. And they don't then in that separate P&L allocate the costs associated with that China business. You should be looking at that. That should be something that you also evaluate. What's your net profitability for China? Does it make sense then, right? It could be that you're still in the red, but it could also mean that you are positive, right? And your profitability is going up. And that means then you might even have the financial resources to kick off straight away to the next phase. Are you being asked to issue FAPIAOs in your own company name? This is also another push, right? Are you being asked for local representation and you actually physically need people on the ground because you need technical expertise, you need a brand manager, whatever it might, customer service? Are you being asked to stock inventory? Do you need to increase your brand image? Do you need to have office space, warehousing facilities? These could all be certain trigger points. All right. Now, just to highlight again, you know, everybody thinks it's sexy to have a company in China. It is, as long as it makes sense for your business. All right. I do want to highlight, obviously, that having an entity in China will provide you with a greater return on investment. Just because it shows commitment to China, it'll be easier for you to bid on projects. It'll be easier for you to win on projects. It will naturally increase your brand image and profile. It will give you the ability to hire people in your own company name and providing stability to them in that regard. It's the ability to invoice and issue local FAPIAOs to customers. Gives you financial control. It provides a structure that you can manage, that you control, that gives you transparency and clarity over your business. It gives you the ability to own specific licenses that you might need for the business versus outsourcing that to distributors and whatnot. And it's also then the ability to own certain marketing platforms and control them as well. So, you know, if you've got an e-commerce site or you're working on Little Red Book, you own those things. It's not the TP that owns them or the media agency that owns them. So I'm going to skip over the case study and I might touch on that at the end, but I do want to highlight the sales channels for China. Okay. And I'm going to breeze through this a little bit and give you an understanding of what the sales channels for China look like. So your option one is direct sales. Like I've said earlier, this is usually phase one, where you might have an e-commerce, you might do e-commerce from your own website. Easy, you might want to have a Chinese website. It's hosted in your own home jurisdiction. And you use that website to try and acquire Chinese consumers, or even just a Chinese website in general to acquire Chinese distributors to your page. Then if you're doing cross-border e-commerce, again, this is direct sales because you don't have to have an entity or anything on the ground to do that. You also don't have to do product registration. But you do have to realize that when you open up your flagship stores on the various e-commerce sites, it's the TP who's in charge of that, not you. Okay. It's doing direct B2B sales, again, with customers that are generated from the home office, and you obtain them either by word of mouth, through trade shows, referrals, etc. Right. Option two is using trade intermediaries. Now, I do want to highlight that in terms of direct sales, a lot of the stuff you still need to use intermediaries to assist you, okay? Not just because it's direct sales that you don't need people on the ground to support your business. You probably do. You need logistics providers. You might have to work with a TP for the cross-border e-commerce, etc. Right? So you're still going to have to use third parties to aid you. Using trade intermediaries for me is the following. It means that you've got a sales rep or a sales agent that is on the ground to represent your brand or represent your company, who is going out to negotiate deals. The transaction itself is still direct, right? So it's a function of option one, which is direct sales, but you're adding the sales rep or agent on the ground to support you. Using distributors. Now, generally, distributors will take on more liability, meaning they'll purchase the products from you, hold them, and they are the owners, and then do a lot more functions, as I said earlier, doing everything from customs clearance, warehousing, to brand development, brand marketing, to then selling to customers. And distributors nowadays can do a dual function where they do both offline and online. Okay. Historically, it was just offline, but a lot of these distributors are learning about e-commerce and are building that into their portfolio of services. Doesn't mean that they're good at it. It just means that they're offering a one-stop solution. Okay. Then you've got media agencies where obviously they're pushing more for online services, online revenue, but they can also do offline work, right? and media agencies are predominantly thinking about marketing and branding, less so on trade. So the trade would still be part of option one, where it's direct sales. Then you're using TPs, which are basically e-commerce providers, if you will, who provide a one-stop solution where they set up your flagship stores, or they put your products on stores that are multifunctional, and they handle everything, the whole fulfillment order. They will coordinate with logistics providers, etc. Okay. They also can handle marketing. Again, it's whether you want to put all your eggs in one basket when you work with them. You don't have to. And I think this is sometimes the cheeky side of certain providers. You don't have to work with them for every service. You can decide what they're an expert on and then split the services with other providers. Again, predominantly cross-border e-commerce or domestic e-commerce. Okay, it's the two functions. I put cross-border e-commerce as direct sales because you don't have to do product registration or anything like that. You still have to use a TP to do the actual fulfillment of the e-commerce. Domestic e-commerce means that you've done product registration, goods are kept in stock on the ground, either bonded, non-bonded, and they're then growing that business, okay? Then you've also got service invoicing agents. Now, what does this mean? And it's not talked about so often. So, you know, I've been only talking about trade so far, trade of products. If you're trading in services, you may not want to set up an entity if you've only got one or two transactions working with companies in China, offering management consultancy, or I don't know, other types of services, right? And you might find that your customers in China are saying, we don't want to pay you overseas, too complicated. We want to pay locally in renminbi, and we want to get a local fapian. Well, there are companies like Woodburn that offer service invoicing as a service, where we earn a small commission for doing the whole payment process, ultimately. And like this, your customers can pay in renminbi, they receive a fapiao from the intermediary, and the payment then goes out overseas. And the agent is basically dealing with the overseas payment. Option 3 is using licensees. Okay, another great way, another great sales channel. You just need to understand what will be your license, what are you licensing, what control are you relinquishing, what do you still want to control? Again, what are the functions of the licensee? You have to be very clear on what the job responsibilities are and what you want them to do. The same about using franchisees, less popular for sure, not so often used, mostly used in the fast food sector, also a little bit in retail, in terms of luxury brands, etc. But it's important also to know that the original brand maintains a lot of the control over the business, but you're still relinquishing a lot of control to the franchisee, and you've got to make sure they're the right partner and they're not going to damage your brand image in China. All right. Option 5 is using an employer of record service to hire your own sales manager. So you have already probably had experience working with the other 4 groups of people. Direct sales is not working. And you're basically saying, you know, I need to again create a combination effect where I'm doing direct sales or I'm using an intermediary, but I need a sales manager on the ground to support the business and basically support the business and scale it and grow it up. What you need to realize is you cannot just sign a freelance agreement with these people. Very gray area. You're not being compliant and you're not mitigating risk. When you hire people in China, whether they're foreigners or Chinese, you have to follow the labor stipulations. Social insurance needs to be paid, income tax needs to be paid, and if they're foreigners, work permits and residence visas need to be obtained. So the employer of record service is basically that you're using an intermediary in an agent. Woodburn offers this service as well, where we hire people on your behalf and they are properly employed. They have a proper employment agreement in place. Payroll is properly done in China. And at least as you are building up and scaling up your business, you are remaining compliant, okay? There are disadvantages to this in that it doesn't provide great stability to the individuals that you are hiring. They don't feel like they belong. And in many instances, they feel like, well, this is not permanent. And if I can't build up this business, I could get fired. And actually, I'm not even working for the company. You know, there's a lot of hesitation signing up in this manner, but it is a great first start. And again, if you do this, you should set KPIs, goals, and objectives that you can also give to the employee or employees to say, if we hit these triggers, we will then set up our own entity. All right. So it's important to pass that message along so they are aware. And that might incentivize them as well to get that moving along and that scaling going up. These are the advantages of using the employer of record service. It's fast, it's legal, it's compliant, and you're cost saving because you're not setting up an entity yet. Option 6. So there are still a lot of people who have a fear in China with the political situation, human rights situation, but they know that it's a market that they want to get into. There are also another set of people or companies where China is not the only Asian market that they want to get into. So as option 6, I'm saying you could also use Hong Kong as your Asian sales hub, meaning that you set up a subsidiary in Hong Kong. Inventory can be kept in Hong Kong, where you are then selling to China, but you are then also selling to other APAC customers that might be in Japan, Korea, Australia, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, etc. Okay. You need to, again, understand what are your goals and objectives? What is your level of risk, level of commitment? Keeping in mind that Hong Kong follows a common law system, so it's easier to set up a company. There's no investment capital that needs to be added in. You can be up and running relatively quickly, apart from the bank account opening, which is still relatively slow, like anywhere else in the world. But you are then catering to not just the Chinese market, but also to the other APAC markets. And you are consolidating your Asian sales into a hub. Because let's face it, China is wonderful and China might be your primary market, but you might very well get introductions from other distributors, from other people, and you want to centralize this function in Hong Kong. Okay. So just to summarize the sales channels, option 1 is direct sales. Option 2 is using trade intermediaries. Option 3 is using licensees. Option 4 is using franchisees. Option 5 is using the employer of record service to hire your own salespeople. Or option 6 is using Hong Kong as your Asian hub, because China is not just the only location you want to be in. Or you might have fear of China, and this might be a good first step for you to get into Asia, get into the Asian field, market, etc. That's the end of today's presentation. If you could let me know what your biggest takeaway from today was, that would be wonderful. I realized there was a lot of content today, but do let me know what your biggest takeaway from today was. And if you've got any questions at all, insert them into the chat box. And as you do that, just let me briefly tell you how you can work with us. We help you to validate your market entry strategies, whether it's to China or Hong Kong. We help with incorporation advisory in corporations in China. We do competitor business scope benchmarkings, appointments of supervisor, finance manager, non-executive director. We're offering this China cross-border e-commerce mentorship program, tax advisory, outsourcing solutions, and in-house recruitment if that's required too. So if any of these services are of interest, or you just want to have a one-to-one discussion, email me at Kristina@woodburnglobal.com. Otherwise, just to let you know what's up and coming for the next 7 weeks, we've got how to register your trademark in China, which is coming up next week. We then have a potential speaker still to be confirmed who's going to be talking about app development in China. Very interesting. We've got Power of Brand Mascot, June 15th. Establishing your brand on China's e-commerce platforms, June 22nd. Effective China PR, June 29th. Market research on a tight budget, something I highlighted today, July 6th. And creating your marketing business model if all you're looking to do is brand awareness and brand development. on July 13th. So again, keep those recorded. In any case, if you have joined in today, you are registered for all of our Wednesday sessions. So just put those into your calendar and pop up if you want to join live and listen to our guest speakers or our topics as well. No questions have popped in thus far, but I will stay online for a couple of minutes in case any do come in. In the meantime, I wish you a great afternoon. Take care and goodbye.